My husband spent 25 years convincing me I was invisible. Then, at a room full of strangers, one man looked straight at me and whispered 5 words that destroyed the life I thought I had built. My husband brought me to that party because he wanted to impress the new CO. He did not bring me because he loved me. He did not bring me because he was proud to have me beside him. He brought me the way a man brings an old coat he is ashamed of but still needs for the weather. Useful enough to keep. Embarrassing enough to hide. That night, before we left the house, Fletcher stood in the doorway of our bedroom and looked me up and down like I was a mistake he had already decided not to forgive. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked. I looked down at the navy dress I had spent 3 days trying to find. It was modest, clean, and carefully pressed. It had long sleeves, a soft waistline, and a small tear near the hem that I had repaired by hand under the kitchen light while Fletcher slept upstairs. "It was the best I could find," I said quietly. He gave a short laugh, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Just stay in the background tonight. The new owner will be there, and I cannot afford for you to embarrass me." I wish I could tell you those words shocked me. They did not. After 25 years of marriage, a woman learns the difference between a sentence meant to hurt and a sentence meant to remind her of her place. Fletcher had been reminding me of my place for so long that sometimes I forgot I had ever stood anywhere else. But that night was different. I did not know it yet, but the man my husband was desperate to impress was the same man I had spent 30 years trying not to remember. And before the night was over, that man would walk across a ballroom full of millionaires, ignore my husband's outstretched hand, take both of mine in front of everyone, and say the words I thought I would never hear again. "I've been searching for you for 30 years. Then, with tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I still love you." My husband dropped his champagne glass. And for the first time in 25 years, every powerful person in that room stopped looking at Fletcher. They looked at me. "I am glad you are here with me. Welcome to When Home Hurts Too. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to the channel if stories like this speak to you. Your support helps me keep sharing stories about love, betrayal, healing, and the quiet strength it takes to begin again when life has almost convinced you that it is too late." That evening began like any other evening in our house, which meant it began with Fletcher giving orders and me trying not to breathe too loudly while receiving them. He had told me 3 days earlier that I would be attending the gala with him. Not asked, told. I was standing by the kitchen counter refilling his coffee when he folded his newspaper and said, "You're coming with me Friday night." I remember the way the coffee pot trembled slightly in my hand. For most wives, an invitation to a corporate gala might have sounded normal. Romantic. Even. A chance to dress up, stand beside your husband, meet the people he worked with, maybe feel included in the world that took him away from home every day. But Fletcher had never wanted me in that world. For 25 years, I had been the wife who stayed home. The wife who remembered which suit needed dry cleaning. The wife who knew how he liked his shirts folded, how much ice he wanted in his scotch, which business partners were important enough to receive handwritten Christmas cards. I was useful behind closed doors. In public, I was a liability. "Are you sure?" I asked before I could stop myself. Fletcher's gray eyes lifted from the paper. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "I just mean I don't really have anything formal enough." He looked at me the way a man looks at a bill he does not want to pay. "Then buy something. Cheap, if you have to. Just don't make me regret bringing you." That was Fletcher's language of affection. A warning disguised as permission. I spent the next 2 days going through discount stores and consignment racks, touching dresses I could not afford, walking away from anything that looked too bright, too young, too noticeable. A woman who has lived with a controlling man does not shop for beauty. She shops for safety. Not too low, not too fitted, not too plain, not too old, not too expensive, not too cheap looking. The dress had to pass a test Fletcher had never explained but always enforced. When I finally found the navy one, I held it against myself in a narrow dressing room with bad lighting and tried to imagine being invisible in it. That was the goal. Not to look beautiful, not to feel confident, just to avoid giving my husband a reason to punish me later with silence, sarcasm, or that cold disappointment that could fill an entire room. Looking back now, I understand something I did not understand then. When someone controls you long enough, you stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will keep the peace?" That is not love. That is survival dressed up as marriage. The gala was held at a downtown hotel with tall glass doors and gold lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Fletcher stepped out of the car first. He adjusted his cufflinks, smoothed his silver hair, and gave the valet a smile he never gave me anymore. Inside, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. White tablecloths covered round tables decorated with flowers that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Men in tailored tuxedos stood in small circles, laughing too loudly at jokes that were not funny. Women moved through the room in silk and diamonds, their voices soft, their posture perfect, their lives looking polished from a distance. I had spent most of my adult life in rooms where everyone seemed to know the rules except me. This room was worse, because Fletcher needed something here. I could feel it in the stiffness of his shoulders. His business had been struggling for months. He thought I did not notice the late-night calls, the unpaid invoices left face down on his desk, the way he snapped whenever the phone rang after dinner. But a wife notices. Especially a wife who has learned to survive by reading moods before they become storms. Morrison Industries had been acquired by Blackwood Holdings, and the new CEO was attending the gala. Fletcher believed one good conversation, one strong handshake, one perfect impression might save him from whatever financial hole he had dug for himself, and I was the one thing he feared might ruin it. He guided me toward the edge of the ballroom, near the bar and a large arrangement of decorative palms. "Stay here," he said under his breath. I looked at him. "Here?" "Yes, I need to speak to people who matter." The words landed quietly, but they landed deep. People who matter. I wanted to ask him what kind of wife becomes invisible enough for her husband to say that without shame. I wanted to ask him whether he remembered that I had once had dreams, opinions, laughter, a voice. I wanted to ask him whether he had married me or simply trained me. But I did what I had been doing for years. I nodded. He walked away, leaving me in the shadows with a glass of water I did not want and a smile I had learned to hold in place. For 20 minutes, I watched him work the room. He moved from one group of men to another, his hand always extended first, his smile too wide, his laughter half a second too loud. I knew that version of Fletcher, the charming version, the polished version, the version that made strangers believe he was generous, confident, respectable. It is a strange kind of loneliness to stand across a room and watch your husband perform kindness for people he wants something from, while knowing he saves his cruelty for the woman who goes home with him. Then the room changed. It was subtle at first. A conversation near the entrance softened. A few heads turned. Then more. The laughter dropped into whispers, and the whole ballroom seemed to draw one quiet breath. I followed everyone's gaze. A tall man had entered the room. He wore a black tuxedo that looked simple only because it was expensive enough not to try. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples. He did not rush. He did not scan the room nervously. He moved with the calm of a man who had nothing to prove because everyone else already knew his power. Someone beside me whispered, "That's him, Julian Blackwood, Julian." The name struck something buried so deep inside me that, for a moment, I forgot where I was. My fingers went to the small locket at my throat. I had worn it beneath my clothes for 30 years, hidden from Fletcher, hidden from the world. Inside, it was not a photograph, not anymore. Just a folded scrap of paper so old the ink had faded. A line Julian had written to me once in college, "Find me in the next life if this one fails us." I had never told anyone about that note. Not Fletcher, not my friends, not even myself, not honestly. Across the room, the man turned slightly, and I saw his face. Older, yes, sharper, marked by time, money, grief, and discipline. But the eyes were the same. Dark, searching, impossibly familiar. Julian Blackwood. The boy who had bought me apple pie in a 24-hour diner when I was too proud to admit I was hungry. The man who had once slipped his grandmother's emerald ring onto my finger beside a college lake and asked me to spend forever with him. The love I had buried so deeply that I had mistaken the grave for healing. My breath caught. No, it could not be him. Life does not do that, I told myself. Life does not bring back the one person you lost at the exact moment your husband is trying to hide you from the world. But life had brought him back, and Fletcher had already seen him. My husband straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and crossed the ballroom with the hungry confidence of a desperate man. I watched him approach Julian, his hand extended, his business smile stretched across his face. For 1 second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the cruelty of it was too perfect. Fletcher Morrison, the man who had spent 25 years making me feel small, was now begging for approval from the only man who had ever made me feel seen. Julian accepted the handshake politely, but he was not looking at Fletcher. His eyes were moving through the crowd, searching. At first, I thought I imagined it. Maybe memory was making me foolish. Maybe my heart, after years of silence, had mistaken coincidence for destiny. Then his gaze found mine. The room disappeared. The music, the chandeliers, the voices, my husband's hand still hanging in the air, all of it fell away. Julian went still. His face changed so quickly that I saw the past break through the present. The powerful CO vanished. For one heartbeat, he was 25 again, standing across from me with the kind of pain only unfinished love can leave behind. He said something to Fletcher. I could not hear what it was. Then he walked away from him, straight toward me. People noticed. Of course they noticed. Powerful men do not abandon conversations without creating curiosity. Fletcher turned, confused at first, then alarmed when he realized where Julian was going. Toward the woman he had told to stay in the background. Toward me. I could not move. Julian stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the moisture in his eyes. He said my name like it had been waiting in his mouth for 30 years. Marina. No one had called me that with tenderness in decades. Fletcher always said my name like a correction. Julian said it like a prayer. Julian, I whispered. He reached for my hands. I should have pulled away. I was married. We were in public. My husband was watching. Half the room was watching. But when Julian's fingers closed around mine, something inside me remembered how it felt to be touched without being owned. His hands were warm, steady, familiar in a way that made no sense and every sense at once. I've been searching for you for 30 years, he said. His voice broke on the last word. A sound moved through the crowd. A gasp, maybe. A whisper. I do not know. I only saw his face. I still love you, he said. Behind him, glass shattered against marble. Fletcher had dropped his champagne. The sound echoed through the ballroom like the end of one life and the beginning of another. And as every eye in that room turned toward me, I realized something that frightened me more than Julian's return, more than Fletcher's rage, more than the secrets rising from the grave of my past. I realized I was not invisible anymore, and I did not know if I was ready to be seen. Being seen by Julian in that ballroom did not simply bring back a man from my past. It opened a door inside me that I had spent 30 years holding shut with both hands. There are memories we do not forget. We only learn how to walk around them. For 30 years, I had walked around Julian Blackwood. I had walked around his name when I saw it in business magazines. I had walked around the smell of black coffee because it reminded me of the library basement where we used to study until the janitor turned off half the lights. I had walked around old love songs, college sweatshirts, mountain sunsets, and the particular ache that comes when you realize the person who knew your heart best now lives only in your silence. But that night, when he said my name in front of everyone, all the years I had carefully stacked between us collapsed. I was 22 again. I was not Fletcher's wife. I was not the quiet woman in the navy dress standing near the bar. I was the girl Julian met on a rainy October night in a university library when my whole life still smelled like wet books, cheap coffee, and the kind of hope young people carry before the world teaches them what power can do. Back then, I was studying literature at a small college outside Boulder. I was there on scholarship, which meant I carried gratitude and fear in equal measure. Every grade mattered. Every missed shift at the campus bookstore mattered. Every dollar I spent had to be explained to myself 3 times before I let it leave my hand. I was not poor in a tragic way. My parents had loved me. They had worked hard. My father repaired roofs and drove home each evening with cracked hands and sunburned shoulders. My mother answered phones at a dental office and kept coupons in an envelope beside the refrigerator. We were not ashamed of where we came from, but I understood very early that love did not pay tuition and pride did not cover rent, so I worked. I shelved books in the morning. I typed papers for graduate students in the afternoon. On weekends, I helped an elderly professor organize his office for $12 an hour and whatever leftover pastries his wife sent with him on Mondays. That was the life Julian walked into. Not through a grand romantic entrance, not with flowers or a sports car or any of the things people imagine rich young men using to impress women. He found me asleep over a copy of Jane Eyre. My cheek was pressed against an open notebook. My pen had rolled under the table. I had been awake for nearly 30 hours preparing for 2 exams and a shift at the bookstore that started at 7 the next morning. When I woke, there was a paper cup of coffee beside my hand and a blueberry muffin wrapped in a napkin. I looked up, startled. A young man stood across from me with rain on his coat and a careful smile on his face. "I didn't know if you liked coffee," he said, "but you looked like someone who needed either caffeine or a rescue team. I should have been offended." Instead, I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had let myself have in days. "I don't accept food from strangers," I said. "Then I should introduce myself." He pulled out the chair across from me. Julian Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me then. Not really. I knew there was a Blackwood Hall on campus and a Blackwood Scholarship Fund, but I had never connected those names to a real person. To me, he was just a tall boy with dark eyes, expensive shoes, and an expression that made him seem more curious than confident. "Marina Hayes," I said. He glanced at the mountain of books around me. "Marina Hayes, are you winning or losing against Victorian literature?" "Too early to tell," he smiled. That was how it began, not with lightning. With coffee I did not ask for and kindness I did not know how to trust. Julian was studying finance, but he read poetry when he thought no one was looking. He came from a family whose name appeared on buildings, donor plaques, and invitations embossed in gold, but he never made me feel small for not belonging to that world. That was what disarmed me. Not his money, not his confidence, his attention. He listened like listening was an act of devotion. When I spoke, he did not wait for his turn to talk. He leaned in. He remembered details. He asked about my mother's arthritis after I mentioned it once. He brought me soup when I caught a winter cold. He walked me across campus after late study sessions, not because he thought I was helpless, but because he said the world was softer when we walked through it together. I did not fall in love with him all at once. I resisted. I told myself men like Julian did not build futures with girls like me. They borrowed our honesty for a season, admired our ambition, then returned to women whose families owned vacation homes and Silver Place settings. But Julian had a way of staying. He stayed through finals week. He stayed through my bad moods. He stayed when I canceled plans because I had to work extra hours. He stayed when I snapped at him once outside the bookstore because he offered to pay for my textbooks, and I heard pity where he meant partnership. "I'm not trying to buy your life, Marina," he told me softly. "I'm trying to stand close enough that you don't have to carry all of it alone." I did not know what to say to that. No one had ever offered me help without making me feel indebted to them. By spring, we were inseparable. We had our own table in the library, our own booth at a little diner near campus, our own path by the lake where the wind moved through the cottonwood trees and made the water look like broken glass. We talked about everything. Books, money, family, fear. The strange loneliness of wanting a life bigger than the one people expected from you. Julian told me he hated the way his parents treated love like a merger. He said every dinner at home sounded like a board meeting. Who married whom? Which family was gaining influence? Which friendship was useful? Which mistake could be hidden if enough money moved quietly enough? "I don't want that life," he told me one evening as we sat on the hood of his car watching snow fall over the foothills. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "A life where I can breathe." At 22, I thought that was the most beautiful thing a man could say. I did not understand then that people raised in cages made of gold sometimes mistake the first open door for freedom. And people raised to survive sometimes mistake sacrifice for love. Maybe that was why we were dangerous to each other. We were both trying to escape something. He wanted to escape expectation. I wanted to escape fear. For a while, we believed love could do both. He proposed in late May, a week before graduation. There was no audience, no violin, no dramatic speech in a crowded restaurant. Just the lake, the mountains, and a sky turning pink behind the clouds. Julian was nervous. I could tell because he kept rubbing his thumb against the side of a small velvet box in his jacket pocket. When he finally opened it, I stopped breathing. The ring was not flashy. It was old, delicate, with a deep green stone surrounded by tiny diamonds. He told me it had belonged to his grandmother, the only person in his family who had ever told him that love mattered more than legacy. She said this should go to the woman who makes me brave, he whispered. My hands shook when he slid it onto my finger. I said yes before he finished asking. For 3 weeks, I was happier than I had ever been. That is the part people do not understand about losing love. They think the grief is only in the ending. But sometimes the cruelest part is remembering how close you came to being safe. We looked at small apartments we could barely afford. We made lists on napkins. He wanted a dog. I wanted bookshelves in every room. He joked that he would cook dinner badly until I loved him enough to forgive it. I told him I would teach high school English and make our future children read before they were old enough to protest. Our future felt ordinary. That was what made it sacred. Then his mother invited me to lunch. Victoria Blackwood chose a restaurant where the forks were heavy and the waiters seemed to glide instead of walk. She was beautiful in a way that felt disciplined. Every strand of hair in place, every sentence sharpened before it left her mouth. She smiled when I arrived. Not warmly, politely. There is a difference. Marina, she said, looking at my dress, my shoes, my hands. Julian has told us so much about you. I wanted to believe that lunch was a beginning. I wanted to believe she would ask about my studies, my family, my plans. Instead, she asked questions that sounded harmless until I felt the blade underneath. How much debt would I have after graduation? Did I understand the public responsibilities of the Blackwood name? Had I considered how difficult it would be to move comfortably in Julian's circles? Would I be willing to sign certain agreements to protect family assets? I answered as calmly as I could. But by the time dessert arrived, I understood. She was not getting to know me. She was measuring how much it would cost to remove me. 3 days later, Julian's father called. Not Julian. His father. He asked me to come to his office downtown. I remember standing outside that building, looking up at all that glass and steel, and feeling as if I were about to walk into the mouth of something that had eaten stronger people than me. Charles Blackwood did not waste time. He did not shout. He did not threaten like men in movies threaten. He spoke softly, which somehow made it worse. He told me Julian was young, impulsive, and confused by rebellion. He said I was probably a good girl, maybe even a bright one, but brightness was not the same as suitability. He said families like theirs did not survive by letting emotion make decisions that affected generations. Then he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of my scholarship information, my parents' mortgage records, my work schedule, even a letter I had written to request additional financial aid. I felt the blood leave my face. I admire ambition, he said, but ambition depends on opportunity. Opportunity can be protected, or it can disappear. I stared at him. What are you saying? I am saying you will end the engagement. The room seemed to tilt. If I don't? He folded his hands on the desk. Then the scholarship committee may receive certain concerns about your outside employment hours. Your father's contracting license may face a review after some unfortunate complaints. Your mother's employer may discover issues with insurance billing that require investigation. And Julian, of course, will learn what it means to build a career without the Blackwood name opening doors. He paused. Love is a powerful feeling, Miss Hayes, but it is rarely stronger than consequences. I walked out of that office with my ring burning on my finger. I should have gone straight to Julian. I know that now. I have replayed that day so many times that I can still see the elevator buttons blurring through my tears. I should have told him everything. I should have trusted him with the truth. Love without truth becomes a room with no windows, and I was the one who closed them. But I was young and terrified, And there was one more thing Charles Blackwood did not know. I was pregnant. I had found out the morning before. 2 pink lines on a drugstore test I had hidden inside an empty cereal box because my roommate was home. I had sat on the bathroom floor with my hand over my mouth, not because I was ashamed, but because I was overwhelmed by the size of the future suddenly growing inside me. I had planned to tell Julian that weekend. I imagined his shock, then his smile. I imagined him kneeling in front of me, pressing his hands to my stomach, promising that we would figure it out. Because that was Julian. He believed problems were things you faced together. But after his father's threats, together no longer felt like enough. I saw my parents losing their home because of me. I saw Julian cut off, blacklisted, furious at his family, and tied forever to the burden of protecting me. I saw our child born into a war between love and power, and I made the worst decision of my life while believing it was the most selfless. I decided to leave him before his family could destroy us all. The breakup happened at our diner, the same booth where he had once watched me eat apple pie at midnight and told me I looked less tired when I smiled. He knew something was wrong the moment I sat down. "What happened?" he asked. I had rehearsed the lie, but rehearsed pain never sounds natural when it leaves the mouth. "I can't marry you," I said. He went very still. "Marina, I've thought about it. I don't belong in your world. I don't want to spend my life proving I deserve to stand beside you." "Then don't prove anything," he said quickly. "Just stand beside me." That almost broke me. I took off the ring. His face changed when he saw it in my palm. "No," he whispered. "I'm sorry." "Don't say sorry like this is already over." I placed the ring on the table between us. My fingers did not want to let go. He stared at it as if I had set down a piece of his heart. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Whatever this is, tell me the truth and we will handle it." The truth was right there. It was in my throat, in my shaking hands, in the life inside me that I was trying to protect by destroying the only love I had ever trusted. But fear can sound like wisdom when you are alone with it long enough, so I lied. "I don't love you the way you love me." The sentence wounded him so visibly that I have never forgiven myself for saying it. He stood up slowly, like the room had lost gravity. "You're lying," he said. I picked up my coat. "Goodbye, Julian." He followed me outside into the rain. "Marina, please." I kept walking. If I had turned around, I would have stayed. So I did not turn around. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. It happened before dawn, quietly and brutally, in the small apartment I had rented after graduation. There was no dramatic scene, no one running through hospital doors. Just pain, blood, fluorescent lights, and a nurse with kind eyes telling me that sometimes these things happen and I should not blame myself. But grief does not obey medical kindness. I blamed myself for everything. For leaving Julian. For lying. For believing fear. For losing the child I had tried so hard to protect. After that, I became very good at functioning. People praised me for it. They said I was strong. They said I was practical. They said I had my whole life ahead of me. But sometimes what people call strength is only shock that has learned to stand upright. I put Julian's ring in a small box and hid it at the back of my closet. I told myself I would return it someday when I could bear to see his face. Then someday became next month, next year, after I was married, after I was older, after the pain became less sharp. It never did. I heard he left Colorado. I heard he built companies. I heard he married someone from his own world, a woman whose name appeared in society pages beside his. I told myself that was good. That meant he had survived me. But late at night, when Fletcher was asleep beside me and the house was quiet, I sometimes wondered if Julian ever hated me. I almost hoped he did. Hatred would have been easier to carry than the possibility that he had kept loving me without knowing why I left. Standing in that ballroom 30 years later, with his hands around mine and my husband's broken glass glittering on the floor behind him, I realized the past had not stayed buried because it was finished. It had stayed buried because I was afraid of what it would ask me to confess when it finally rose. And now Julian had found me. Not the girl from the library. Not the young woman by the lake. Not the terrified 22-year-old who walked away in the rain. He had found the woman all those choices had created. And I knew, with a fear that reached deeper than my marriage, that before I could explain Fletcher, Before I could explain the gala, before I could explain the bruised places in my present, I would first have to tell Julian the truth about the girl who broke his heart while carrying his child. The truth I had hidden from him. The truth I had hidden from myself. The truth that had been waiting 30 years for a voice. That small beam of light did not heal me immediately. It only showed me how much of myself had been living in the dark. For 3 nights after the gala, I barely slept. Fletcher moved through the house like a storm that had not decided where to land. He did not shout at first. That would have been easier. Instead, he became quiet in the way he always did when he wanted me to feel the weight of his anger before he ever said a word. He asked questions that were not questions. How long have you known him? Why did he look at you like that? What exactly did you do before you met me? Every sentence carried an accusation. Every pause asked me to confess to sins I had not committed. I told him the truth he could handle. Julian was someone I knew a long time ago. That was all. But Fletcher had spent too many years studying my silences. He knew there was more. What he did not know was that, for the first time in our marriage, I was no longer willing to hand him every private part of me just because he demanded it. On the 3rd morning, while Fletcher was taking a call in his study, I took Julian's business card from the drawer where I had hidden it under a stack of old receipts. My hands trembled before I even touched the phone. That is something people do not understand about fear. Even when the door is unlocked, your body can still behave like a prisoner. I dialed the number. A woman answered with a calm, professional voice. Muster Vale's office. For a moment, I could not speak. Then I said, "This is Marina Hayes." There was a brief silence. Then her voice softened. "He's been waiting for your call." Those words nearly broke me. He had been waiting. For 30 years, I had told myself that my absence had become smaller with time, that Julian had moved on, that whatever we were had faded into one of those tender stories people carry from youth but do not need anymore. But he had been waiting. When his voice came through the line, low and careful, I closed my eyes. Marina. Just my name. Nothing more. And still, I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to stay standing. We met at a quiet cafe near the river, far from Fletcher's clubs, far from the polished places where people knew his name and smiled at his lies. Julian was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window with 2 untouched coffees between us. He stood when he saw me, not quickly, not dramatically, gently, as if sudden movement might frighten the truth back into hiding. "You came," he said. I almost didn't. I know. That was the first thing that made me cry. Not a declaration, not a memory. Just the fact that he understood fear without needing me to explain it. We sat across from each other while morning light moved slowly over the table. For a while, neither of us touched the coffee. Finally, Julian said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Not politely. Not carefully. Honestly." I nodded. "Why did you leave?" I had spent 30 years preparing for that question and still felt unprepared when it came. So I told him. Not beautifully. Not in perfect order. Truth rarely comes out clean when it has been buried too long. I told him about the meeting with his father, the folder, the threats, the way power could sit behind a desk and speak softly while destroying a person's future. I told him about my parents, my scholarship, my fear that loving him would cost everyone around me something they could not afford to lose. Then I told him the part I had never spoken aloud. I was pregnant. Julian's face changed. Not with anger, with devastation. I saw the color leave him slowly, as if my words had reached someplace deeper than breath. "What?" "I found out the day before your father called me." His hands tightened around the coffee cup, but he did not interrupt. "I was going to tell you. I had already imagined how I would say it. I thought you would be scared at first, and then happy. I thought we would panic together and then make a plan together, because that was what we did." My voice broke. "But after your father threatened everyone I loved, I convinced myself that leaving was the only way to protect you. To protect the baby. To protect whatever future might still be possible." Julian looked away then, through the window, toward the river, toward something I could not see. "What happened?" he asked. I knew what he meant. I lost the baby 3 weeks later. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full of every life we never got to live. Julian covered his mouth with one hand. His shoulders bent forward, and for a moment he was not a powerful man, not a CO, not someone people stood straighter around. He was just the boy from the lake hearing that he had once been a father and had never been allowed to know. "I am so sorry," I whispered. He shook his head, but tears were already in his eyes. "You carried all of that alone?" I looked down at my hands. "Yes. Why didn't you come back? Because by then I had broken you, and I thought telling you would only make the wound crueler." "No," he said softly. "It would have made it true." That sentence stayed with me, because he was right. Pain with truth can eventually heal. Pain built on lies becomes a house you get trapped inside. Julian reached across the table, not to take my hand this time, but to place his fingers near mine, leaving me the choice. That small space between us felt more respectful than most of my marriage. "I looked for you," he said. "I know. No, Marina, you don't. I looked for you for years. At first, myself. Then through friends. Later, through investigators. Every time I got close, something went wrong. Addresses changed. Records disappeared. People suddenly stopped returning calls. A cold feeling moved through me. "What do you mean?" He leaned back slowly, studying my face. "I thought you didn't want to be found." That was what every trail eventually told me. My stomach tightened. Fletcher's face flashed in my mind, his questions after the gala. The way he had known Julian's name too quickly. The way he had watched the two of us like a man seeing a locked door open from the inside. When I returned home that afternoon, Fletcher was waiting in the living room. He had not gone to the office. That alone told me everything. "Did you enjoy your coffee?" he asked. The room went quiet around me. I had not told him where I was going. I set my purse down slowly. "How did you know?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Marina, after all these years, do you really think there is anywhere you can go that I won't find out?" The old me would have apologized. The old me would have lowered my eyes. But something had changed in that cafe. Truth had entered my body, and it made submission feel impossible. "You knew he was looking for me," I said. Fletcher's smile faded. Not because he was shocked, because he realized I had finally reached the right question. He stood, buttoning his jacket with slow, practiced calm. I knew enough. The floor seemed to move beneath me. For how long? He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "Long enough to protect my marriage." My breath caught. Protect. That was the word controlling people always used when they meant control. Protect the marriage. Protect the family. Protect your reputation. Protect you from yourself. But protection without freedom is just a prettier word for ownership. "What did you do?" I asked. Fletcher looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw the truth without decoration. He was not afraid because he had hurt me. He was afraid because I had found out. And in that moment, before he said another word, I understood that the prison I had lived in for 25 years had not been built only from silence, money, and shame. It had been built from secrets. And Fletcher was still holding the key. Fletcher was still holding the key, but for the first time in 25 years, I was no longer sure I needed his permission to walk out of the room. He looked at me as if he were waiting for the familiar version of me to return. The quiet one. The careful one. The woman who softened every question before asking it, who apologized for taking up space, who treated his anger like weather she had no right to challenge. But that woman had been sitting in a cafe across from Julian only hours earlier, telling the truth for the first time in 30 years. And truth does something dangerous to a controlled woman. It reminds her that fear is not the same thing as loyalty. "What did you do?" I asked again. Fletcher walked to the bar cart and poured himself a drink. His hand was steady, which frightened me more than if it had trembled. A guilty man might panic. Fletcher only adjusted. "You're being emotional," he said. "No, I'm being specific." He turned around slowly. I could see him recalculating me. That was what Fletcher always did when I behaved in a way he had not approved. He searched for the weakness he could press. Shame, money, age, my past, my dependence. He had spent decades collecting those weapons and calling them marriage. "I made sure you didn't ruin your life," he said. The room seemed to shrink around those words. "My life?" "Yes, Marina. Your life. Our life. You were vulnerable when I met you. Broken, lonely. You would have gone running back to him the second he snapped his fingers. That wasn't your choice to make. His eyes hardened. Someone had to make it. You clearly weren't capable. There it was. The sentence beneath every sentence he had spoken for 25 years. You are not capable. Not capable of choosing your clothes. Not capable of managing money. Not capable of having friends. Not capable of working. Not capable of knowing your own heart. I used to absorb those messages until they became my inner voice. But now, hearing them aloud, I felt something rise in me that was older than fear. Anger. Not loud anger. Not reckless anger. A clean, clarifying anger. The kind that tells you where the boundary should have been all along. How long did you know Julian was searching for me? I asked. Fletcher took a sip of his drink. The first inquiry came less than a year after we married. Some private investigator called my office asking whether I knew a Marina Hayes. It wasn't difficult to understand what was happening. My chest tightened. Less than a year. Julian had searched for me when the pain was still fresh, when there might still have been time to tell the truth before my silence hardened into a life. What did you tell him? I told him enough. What does that mean? It means I made sure he understood you were married, settled, and uninterested in reopening the past. My knees felt weak, but I did not sit down. You lied. I protected you. You lied. He slammed the glass down harder than necessary. Fine. Yes, I lied. I paid people to stop calling. I gave wrong addresses. I let a few investigators believe you had moved overseas. Once, I even had a lawyer send a letter threatening harassment charges if Blackwood's people continued contacting you. The words came one after another, each one colder than the last. I stared at him, trying to understand how many years of my life had been shaped by information I had never been allowed to receive. Julian had not abandoned me. He had not forgotten. He had not accepted my lie and moved on without looking back. He had reached for me, again and again. And Fletcher had cut the lines before I could feel the pull. You had no right, I said. Fletcher laughed once. No, right? I was your husband. That didn't make you my owner. The moment I said it, the air changed. Fletcher's face went still. For all his polished control, he could not hide how deeply those words struck him. Not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. He had built an entire marriage around the belief that loving someone meant possessing the final say over her life. He stepped closer. Be very careful. I did not move back. That surprised both of us. I was careful for 25 years, I said. Careful with your moods. Careful with your reputation. Careful with your money. Careful with every word I spoke in public. Careful not to embarrass you, not to disagree with you, not to become too much of a person in rooms where you needed me to be decoration. My voice shook, but it did not break. I am tired of being careful with a man who was never careful with me. For a second, I saw something like panic pass through him. Then it turned into contempt. You think Julian wants you now? You think a man like that has spent all these years waiting for a middle-aged woman with no career, no money, and no idea how the real world works? The insult landed, but not where he expected, because part of me had already asked that question. I had looked at Julian in the cafe and wondered if he loved me, or the girl I used to be. I had wondered if 30 years of longing had made him fall in love with an idea instead of a person. I had wondered if I would disappoint him simply by being real. But Fletcher's cruelty revealed something important. He was not trying to protect me from Julian's disappointment. He was trying to return me to my own. I don't know what Julian wants, I said quietly. But I know what I don't want anymore. Fletcher's jaw tightened. And what is that? This. The word was small, but it felt like the first honest prayer I had spoken in years. This house, this marriage, this life where I have to earn peace by disappearing. He stared at me. You'll leave with what, exactly? The clothes I bought you? The car in my name? The bank account you can't access without me? I felt the old fear move through me then. It knew the path well. Money, security, shelter, age. The terrible question every controlled woman eventually faces. Where will I go if I leave? For years, that question had been enough to keep me still. But that afternoon, another question rose beside it. What will happen to me if I stay? And for the first time, staying frightened me more than leaving. I'll figure it out, I said. Fletcher smiled. It was a small, ugly smile. No, you won't. He walked toward the side table, picked up his phone, and held it like a weapon. If you walk out of this house, I'll freeze every account before dinner. I'll call my attorney. I'll make sure you don't get a dime until a judge forces me, and by then you'll be tired, humiliated, and broke. You want independence? Let's see how brave you feel when you have to pay for it. There was a time when that threat would have ended the conversation. I would have apologized. I would have said I was confused. I would have promised not to see Julian again. But truth had made me inconvenient. I looked at the man I had called my husband and saw, perhaps for the first time, not a giant, but a frightened man guarding a shrinking kingdom. You can call your attorney, I said. I'm going to call mine, he blinked. It was such a small reaction, but it gave me courage. My attorney? He repeated. I don't have one yet, but I will. I turned toward the stairs. Where are you going? To pack a bag. He followed me into the hallway. Marina. There was warning in my name, but there was something else too. Fear. He had never imagined I would leave while he was still speaking. Upstairs, I took a suitcase from the closet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unzip it. I packed without thinking clearly. 2 sweaters, underwear, toiletries, the navy dress from the gala, a pair of shoes. My documents from the small fireproof box hidden behind winter blankets. Then I stopped. The velvet ring box was still in the back of the drawer. For a moment, I only looked at it. Not because it meant I was choosing Julian. I needed to understand that. Leaving Fletcher could not simply be running toward another man. If I did that, I would only be trading one dependence for another, even if the second was kinder. No. I picked up the ring because it belonged to the truth. The truth of who I had been. The truth of what I had lost. The truth of what I was finally willing to face. When I came downstairs, Fletcher was standing by the front door. You walk out now, he said, and you do not come back. I met his eyes. For 25 years, that sentence had been the locked gate at the edge of every argument. This time, it sounded like an opening. I know, I said. I stepped around him. Outside, the air was cold enough to hurt my lungs. I put the suitcase in my car and sat behind the wheel, gripping it with both hands. For several minutes, I could not move. Leaving did not feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. That is another thing people misunderstand. Freedom does not always arrive with music and certainty. Sometimes it arrives with trembling hands, an overnight bag, and no idea where you will sleep. I drove to a small hotel near the river, the kind with beige walls and a lobby that smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. I checked in using a credit card Fletcher had not thought to cancel yet, then sat on the edge of the bed with my suitcase unopened beside me. My phone was in my hand. Julian's number was still on the card. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called. He answered on the second ring. Marina? I left him, I said. The words came out flat, almost stunned. Julian was silent for one breath, then another. Are you safe? Not come to me. Not I told you. Not what does this mean for us? Are you safe? That question undid me. I think so, I whispered. Where are you? I told him. I'm coming. Julian, wait, he paused. I need you to understand something, I said. I didn't leave him because of you. A quiet moment passed. Then Julian said, Good. I closed my eyes. Good? Yes, because I don't want you to need me in order to be free. I want you to be free enough to decide what you want. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying not to sob. After decades of being controlled in the name of love, respect felt almost unbearable. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the hotel room door. I opened it. Julian stood in the hallway, his coat damp from the rain, his face marked with concern he was trying not to turn into pressure. He did not step inside until I moved back and let him. He did not touch me until I reached for his hand. And when I finally told him everything Fletcher had admitted, every lie, every blocked call, every false trail, every threat, Julian listened with a grief so quiet it frightened me. When I finished, he looked at the floor for a long time. Then he said, There's something I need to tell you too. The room went still. My heart tightened, because the way he said it made me understand that the truth had not finished with us yet. The silence that followed Julian's words felt different from every silence I had ever known because, for the first time, it was not filled with fear. Instead, it was filled with possibility. He stood by the hotel window while rain traced slow lines across the glass. I watched him carefully, wondering what truth could still be waiting for us after everything we had already uncovered. Finally, he turned toward me. "My company isn't why I came back to this city," he said quietly. "It was only the excuse," I frowned. For years, every time another investigator failed, every time another lead disappeared, people told me to let you go. They said you had chosen another life. They said searching for someone who clearly wanted to stay hidden wasn't healthy. He smiled sadly. "Maybe they were right," I shook my head. "No, I stopped looking professionally 5 years ago," he continued. But I never stopped hoping accidentally. His honesty settled over the room like warm light. There was no dramatic declaration, no impossible promise. Only a man admitting that hope had quietly survived where certainty had not. I realized then that hope is different from obsession. Obsession demands. Hope waits. For so many years, Fletcher had convinced me that every relationship was built on control. Someone always had to lead. Someone always had to surrender. Sitting across from Julian, I understood that healthy love asks neither. It simply leaves room. Room to breathe. Room to heal. Room to become yourself again. "I don't know who I am anymore," I admitted. The confession surprised even me. I had spent decades introducing myself as someone's wife, someone's hostess, someone's dependable partner. Without that identity, I felt strangely unfinished. Julian didn't rush to comfort me. Instead, he asked the question no one else ever had. "Who were you before you started apologizing for existing?" I stared at him. The question reached somewhere beneath memory. Who was I? Not who had I married. Not what had I survived. Who had I been? Slowly, pieces returned. I remembered the girl who filled notebooks with observations about strangers she met on buses. The young teacher who believed every child deserved someone to tell them they were capable of greatness. The woman who laughed loudly enough to make people at nearby tables smile without knowing why. Somewhere between grief and marriage, I had mistaken adaptation for maturity. I had become easier to manage. Not happier. "There she is," Julian said softly. "What?" The woman I just saw remembering herself. Tears blurred my vision. "I don't know how to become her again." "You don't have to become her," he replied. "You just have to stop abandoning her." No therapist had ever said anything wiser. No book I had read during sleepless nights had reached me the way those words did. Healing, I realized, was not creating a new person. It was giving the forgotten one permission to come home. Over the following week, my life became strangely ordinary, and that ordinary rhythm felt miraculous. I met with an attorney recommended by the hotel manager. I opened my first personal bank account in more than 2 decades. I rented a small, furnished apartment with squeaky floors, outdated kitchen cabinets, and windows that overlooked a public park instead of a perfectly landscaped private garden. It wasn't luxurious. It was mine. The first evening there, I bought groceries without asking anyone's permission. I stood in the cereal aisle for nearly 10 minutes because I couldn't remember which brand I actually liked. That sounds ridiculous. But when another person has made hundreds of tiny decisions for you over many years, even choosing breakfast becomes an act of recovery. I bought the cereal with the brightest box, not because it was healthier, because Fletcher always said it looked childish. The next morning, I ate it while sitting on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. It tasted like freedom. Some victories are so small that only the person who fought for them understands their size. Julian called often. Sometimes we talked for an hour, sometimes only 5 minutes. Never once did he ask where our relationship was going. Never once did he ask whether I still loved him. He asked different questions. Did you sleep? Have you eaten? How did the meeting with your lawyer go? What made you smile today? Looking back now, I think those questions saved me. Not because they solved my problems, because they reminded me that I was a whole person before I was ever someone's partner. One afternoon, he invited me to visit a community education center his foundation had recently funded. "I think there's someone you should meet," he said. Inside the building, children were reading in colorful classrooms while adults attended evening literacy classes. An elderly volunteer approached us carrying a stack of books. Julian smiled. "Marina, this is Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. She directs the education program." "Mrs." Brooks shook my hand warmly. "I've heard wonderful things about you," I laughed. "I hope only the true ones." "The truest one," she said, "is that you used to teach because you believed education changes lives." I looked at Julian. He simply shrugged. "You mentioned it once, a very long time ago, Mrs." Brooks smiled at both of us. "We're looking for someone to help redesign our adult reading program." I blinked. "I haven't taught in years," she nodded. "Then perhaps it's time." Her words lingered long after the conversation ended. Perhaps it's time. Not to return to the woman I used to be, not to erase the years that had shaped me, but to carry forward the parts of myself that had survived despite them. That evening, walking alone through the park outside my apartment, I realized something extraordinary. For the first time in decades, I wasn't walking because someone expected me home. I wasn't checking my phone to avoid making someone angry. I wasn't rehearsing explanations before speaking. I was simply walking. The autumn air smelled of damp leaves and distant fireplaces. Children laughed near the fountain. An older couple held hands on a nearby bench without saying a word. Life continued around me with astonishing indifference to my pain. Oddly enough, I found comfort in that. The world had not ended because I finally chose myself. It had quietly made room for me to begin again. Just as I reached my apartment building, my phone vibrated. It was my attorney. Her voice sounded calm. "Marina, there's been an unexpected development." My heart tightened. "What happened?" She paused only briefly. "I think you need to come to my office tomorrow morning." Something in her tone told me this wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about the truth. And this time, the truth wasn't coming to take something away from me. It was finally coming to give something back. In the end, this story was never only about a man from my past finding me again. It was about a woman who had been missing from her own life for far too long. For years, I thought survival was the same as peace. I thought keeping the house quiet meant I was being mature. I thought shrinking myself was the price of being loved, respected, or protected. But I was wrong. Real love does not ask you to disappear. Real love does not punish you for having a voice. Real love does not make you afraid to choose a dress, spend money, call a friend, or tell the truth about what hurts. The hardest part of leaving was not walking out the door. The hardest part was admitting that the door had been open for a long time, but fear had convinced me I had no right to step through it. What I learned is this: sometimes the person who saves you is not the one who comes back into your life. Sometimes the person who saves you is the version of yourself who finally whispers, "Enough, enough silence, enough shame, enough pretending that being comfortable is the same as being free." And maybe that is the lesson we all need to carry. Do not wait until someone else sees your worth before you believe it. Pay attention to the places where you feel small, tired, controlled, or afraid to be honest. Start with one small act of courage. Say what you mean. Ask for help. Keep your own records. Reconnect with someone safe. Make one decision that belongs only to you. Healing does not always arrive like a miracle. Sometimes it begins with a bank account, a packed bag, a phone call, a quiet walk, or one honest sentence spoken after years of swallowing the truth. So if you are listening to this and you have ever felt invisible in your own life, I want you to remember this. It is not too late to come back to yourself. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone. The life you lost may not return exactly as it was, but a new life can still begin with dignity, courage, and hope. My question for you is simple. Have you ever had a moment when you finally chose yourself? Please share your answer in the comments so others can learn from your perspective too. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel to support us and help us keep creating more meaningful stories like this.